So welcome, Florian. We are switching to English, and I'm super happy to have you here. We talked almost a year ago, and I'm very curious what you have to report about your approach to your company. And the stage is yours. Please introduce yourself, and I'm very eager to listen to what you have to say. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for the invite, for hosting me. Great pleasure to be part of this community for the first time. Um, yeah, it's really hard all the time to talk about myself. It's something I don't really like that much. But to give you a little bit of a context, before jumping into the presentation, where you will learn more about me than you might want. Um, so on paper, you could say that I'm an innovation guy. That's what I'm doing for way more than a decade. I founded multiple companies and I served as an innovation expert on multiple terrains. I'm director in the Center of Innovation at Management Institute in Switzerland, so doing executive education for like really experienced executives, especially in the field of strategic innovation. I have over a decade in consulting experiences for really high profile companies, so like Fortune 500, DAX companies, especially executive level, spanning from Adidas, LVMH, L'Oreal, also for governmental institutions, and so on and so on. And yeah, it's innovation is what I'm doing. I think the interesting part is how I'm doing it, and that's probably what's different from a lot of different other companies, and that's also what I want to talk about today. So I'm really going to show you what the the last company I've helped building is doing and how. But I'd like to embed this in a broader context so that you get the most, not just about description of what we're doing, but also maybe give you a lot of insights into innovation itself and maybe some parts of innovation that you don't know already. Which what I call the hidden dimension of innovation, something that's not in plain sight, and also what this has to do with how we build the company. I also brought some basic slides. I can share them if you like. We could also do it without, whatever you prefer. But I could share my screen if that helps. Let me just quickly. Where is it? Where's the share button? There it is. Stop. Just let me know once I made it bigger. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I jumped right in. I heard that we have time for question afterwards. So yeah, maybe you can have some notes or whatever, and then you can just shoot in the end with no mercy. I'm happy to answer all of the questions. So yeah, let me start with a question. It's always a good thing. What if everything we're most certain about is wrong? You know? So what if the way that we see the world, the way we make decisions, um, even the goals we're chasing, maybe, what if they aren't really ours? And what if they shaped by invisible patterns, some we didn't choose, but we have been following for years, maybe all of our lives without even realizing it. And today in the talk, it's not just about business, not about just my business, not about entrepreneurship or innovation, but it's about how we see and what happens when we start questioning it. So how do we access this, what I call it, the hidden dimension of innovation by challenging perception itself? you know? So let me ask you another question. What if you're wrong? Not just about the details, but about the whole foundation of how you see yourself, others, or the world. And there are some questions that they just don't give you the simple answers, but they shift the way you see things. And what if you're wrong is one of those questions. because it reminds us that there might be more than we thought, more maybe that we've been allowing ourselves to even imagine. And a lot of people feel stuck, you know? And I've seen this again and again and again for all the years I've been working, smart, driven, accomplished individuals. And many of them have reached goals they once maybe only dreamt of, and yet something feels off. There's a sense of maybe emptiness, like something is missing, but they can't really name it, and they can't find a way out. They just feel, yeah, stuck. And even those who realize it cannot escape their routines. And that is no wonder because that's just the way our brains work. So if you imagine, I depicted a snowy hill here. If you imagine this snow-covered hill, on the first day of snow, children come out with their sleds. They go down the hill in all kinds of directions, exploring the still open terrain. But as they keep sledding, the snow starts forming tracks. And the more often a certain path is used, the deeper the tracks get. And soon new kids arrive and follow the existing tracks. And because it's easier, they stay in the tracks. And eventually, most sleds end up in the same few tracks, even though other routes would have been more fun or even faster. And this is how our habits, beliefs, and mental patterns work in our brains. You probably know the saying, what fires together, wires together. So repetition shapes our neural networks. And I will come in a bit to the point where this correlates to how we shaped our company. Our brain is designed to conserve energy. Conscious thinking is metabolically really expensive. So our brain tries to offload as much as possible to automated subconscious processes. This is efficient for survival, but it's really limiting for transformation and also for innovation. So this also leads to repetition and routines in our external world. Now we live in daily loops, all of us, we wake up, we check our phones, we drink coffee, we work, we eat, we sleep, we repeat, and we rarely ever question it. And studies show that only 5% of our decisions are actually made consciously. And the rest is just subconscious programming running on autopilot. And there's also research, it's really interesting, that suggests that 90 to 95% of the thoughts we think today are the same thoughts we thought yesterday. And it's not just our thoughts, even our feet follow the same path. Studies show that most people take 90% of the same steps every day. Home, work, grocery store. And every time we do, we reinforce the loops, like on the hill. And I've worked with top level executives for over a decade now in many, many, many industries. And when you ask them what they want, they say the same thing: more profit, more growth. And that's what their KPIs, their incentive, their culture, it's all, where they're pointing towards. But when you ask why, why more profit, the answers usually start to unravel, because they say, because that's success, or because we're expected to, or because that's what everybody wants. But when you dig deeper, you realize many don't really know what they're truly aiming for. They are caught in a loop, growing to grow, scaling to scale. And the result is often misaligned strategies, sometimes even burnout or just empty victories. And even innovation is stuck. The same people with the same experiences in the same industries trying to solve the same problems. And so they come up with kind of the same ideas. And I often get the questions, especially in innovation departments, why does every competitor release similar innovations at the same time? Is there some kind of espionage or something? Usually there isn't. It's just, the fact that you have the same ingredients and you kind of are wondering why isn't the pie changing? And you might say, but there's so much change happening. But a lot of change isn't real change. That was one of the most powerful observations, I think, of the past 10 years. A lot of the change we see isn't real change. And I've witnessed it so many times. Executives, teams, companies that were changing all the time with an unconscious goal to make everything stay the same. And so they did. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So just for a second, imagine you were born with these glasses, orange tinted glasses. And there's no way for you to imagine the world as it is unless you take off the glasses. So reality isn't something absolute, it's shaped by our perception. And it's not just it's not just what we see, it's also how we see it. Oh, wait, what happened? Something is wrong here.
Oh, he's kicked out. I think this is the problem right now. So let's wait a second. He probably joins in a second.
Great talk. I'm very fascinated.
I just paused.
Okay, so we're not only wrong about what we perceive as reality, we also just perceive a tiny little fraction of the whole thing. Humans can only see about 0.00035% of the total light spectrum. So if you would map the full light spectrum from Los Angeles to New York, the part that humans could actually see is the size of a peanut. And once you realize how little of reality we actually perceive, a powerful question begins to emerge. What if I'm wrong? You know? What if the stories I tell myself, the truth I believe, and the assumptions I live by are only fragments of a much bigger picture. So reality isn't what we see, it's what our minds want us to see. And true clarity isn't something we find outside, it's something we uncover inside once we start seeing. And to clearly see, we have to remove the layers that are in the way. And I'd like to tell you a little story about how we use this kind of thinking to turn the traditional idea of business on its head. So for more than 10 years, I've been building a company together with other partners, not just myself, called Venture Idea. And the goal was to start a respected strategy and innovation consultancy that would compete with companies like BCG and McKinsey, but without all the aspects we didn't like, like the upper out culture or the 80 plus hour work weeks. So when we started Venture Idea, we were surrounded by the typical startup narrative. And I just had founded a company in Berlin, and it just came from that space. And there was raise money, grow fast, maximize profit. But we realized that we didn't want to build a company for the company's sake, but we wanted to build it for ourselves, for our lives and for the people we work with. And so we knew we had to do something radical. And to take off our glasses here, we put a simple question to the core of what we were doing every day. And once a year, we took the whole team on a retreat, not to brainstorm strategy or chase some KPIs, but to ask one question. And that was, what do you really want out of life? So in the desert, the mountains, by the sea. As you see there, we meditated, we practiced yoga, we reflected, we shared very deeply, very deeply. We even asked questions from psychotherapy, couples therapy. We used silence, physical exercise, breath work, long walks, everything to find clarity for ourselves. And there was a lot of room for everything, for all of our emotions, like laughter, sometimes even anger, and more tears that you would expect from like a company retreat somewhere in a pretty beautiful place. So then when we came back and laid all our personal answers on the table, only then did we ask, how does our company has to look like for the next year so we will get there? So first, what do you really want out of life? And then how does our company has to look like for the year to come so we will get there? So instead of, let's say, using life to serve business, we use the business to serve our lives. And we structured the company around our individual visions. For example, one person worked 4 days a week to pursue a side project. Another shifted roles to spend more time with his kids. We rejected clients because they weren't aligned with one person's values. We even opened up an office in France that didn't make any sense for us, but because one of us wanted to live with his French girlfriend in Paris. The company adjusted really to fit the people and not the other way around. And we grew, and that quickly. And what do you do when you grow? You hire more people, right? Wrong, that's just one way. But then you ask people, especially in the startup world, this seems to be the only way because the more people you have, the more successful you are. I had that quite often. You walk into people from your past and they're like, oh, how many people are you? Oh, still four. Ah, yeah, okay. I got like 10. Yeah, so success is kind of measured in head counts. But taking off the glasses again, we did the exact opposite. We decided to stay as small as possible. So by head count. And that way, we were able to work in the project ourselves rather than doing sales with a lot of pressure to get enough money to cover the immense overhead that you have when you have a big team. And that is exactly what gave us the competitive edge over the big ones. Because with Venture Idea, you would always work directly with a partner and not with an associate or a junior. And that was also much more fun for us because we didn't just want to do administration all day, but we wanted to actually work on the projects. So win-win basically. And that way we were able to have high margin pricing, very low overhead while working only very few hours. And it worked. We really competed for the same project as the big ones. And we were awarded multiple times as the best consultancy in Germany for strategy, for innovation, and for growth. We work with global brands, organization, ministries. We published books together. We lectured at business schools. But most importantly, we stayed aligned. And that was the real magic, not scaling faster, but scaling truer. We built a consultancy that truly put the employees first. And that was a place where it was possible to work 9 to 5, stay healthy, and still compete directly with the giants. In an industry built on the belief that you must sacrifice yourself and chase external validations through status or power or money. And we believed there was another way. And we proved it. So in the end, we weren't just optimizing work, we were optimizing our lives. And yet, this even this model has its limitations, because even when you create a radically new paradigm, it's still a paradigm. And if you don't question it, you will get stuck all over again. That's the trap. And I will talk about it a little bit later. That's a big one. And the question is, how can you challenge something that you can't even see? And that's the tricky part. Most of our beliefs, behaviors, and assumptions are invisible to us. And they are baked into how we perceive the world, as I said before. And I mean, earlier I talked about the tinted glasses, and we are all wearing them. Glasses colored by culture, by childhood, even by trauma or by ambition, by your relationships. And here's the thing, you can't take them off by thinking harder. And you can't outsmart your own filter. So to truly challenge something invisible, you have to shift how you see, not what you see. And that means stepping out of the habitual state of mind. And the answer lies in expanding your state of consciousness. And that's not new. Throughout history, some of the most radical breakthroughs, scientific, artistic, philosophical, have come from people who found ways to access altered states of consciousness, states where the mind isn't limited by the routines and the filters of the past. And yeah, so how do we do it? Ethically safe, intentionally. And I brought you some modalities, some powerful modalities that are already reshaping today how we innovate, how we lead, how we live. And one of them is meditation and contemplative practices. And it's not just about sitting still, it's about training your mind to witness itself. It's, in the noise of our daily routines, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. But when you sit in silence, truly sit, you begin to see the patterns that you usually won't see. And you begin to realize how many of your thoughts aren't actually yours. And neuroscience shows us that meditation can physically change the structure of our brain. And people like probably know about Steve Jobs, who credited meditation as a profound influence on his ability to see what others couldn't. He said it helped him access deeper intuition, something that shaped the way he built up. Then there is something I call, like, that's not my naming, but I call in the presentation somatic work and breath work, because the body holds what the mind forgets. Every tension, every trauma, every story we don't finish telling lives somewhere in our body. And that's why somatic work, whether it's yoga, breath work, energy work, is so powerful, because it allows us to release what words cannot reach. And I've seen executives break down in breathwork sessions, and this become actually quite normal. I went to World Economic Forum in Davos in January, and doing breathwork sessions with executives there was just really common. So it's nothing strange anymore. But I've seen executives break down in these sessions, not there, it was a different occasion. Not because they were weak, but because they were finally meeting parts of themselves they had ignored for years. So they saw something new. And also that's not used. In ancient China, they used qigong to help leaders sharpen intuition and to make better decisions. And today, these tools are just as relevant. A regulated body creates a clear mind, and that clarity is the soil in which new ideas grow. Then maybe an even more extreme way is also in the mainstream media in the past years is psychedelic experiences. And few tools are as powerful and as misunderstood as psychedelics. So substances like LSD, or psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, and so on. And when used responsibly and with proper guidance, and I'm, for example, a facilitator myself, they can dissolve the ego, reveal hidden patterns, and connect us with something much greater than ourselves. Remember the snowy hill metaphor from the beginning? Mm, I said that, the tracks were like the neural pathways. They're getting deeper and deeper. And what psychedelics do is they make it snow again. And the brain is able to form completely new tracks really easily. And people like Francis Crick, I think was the name, famously attributed part of his discovery of the DNA double helix to the expanded thinking enabled by LSD. Or Carrie Mullis, who invented the PCR test we all now know since COVID, said that the idea came during a psychedelic experience. You may have noticed that in Silicon Valley, microdosing, so taking very tiny doses of psychedelics, is becoming a real norm. There's a lot of criticism there, and it's a good one, good criticism, but that's something that we see happening. So psychedelics, when integrated properly, help people move beyond the usual binary thinking, and they create space for paradox, for complexity, for emergence. And that's where true innovation and also personal development or personal transformation can begin. And then there are way more experiences that I just summed up with some examples and call it experiences on the edge. Because sometimes to find something new, you have to leave the familiar behind. And that's the power of extreme experiences. They take us out of context and they strip away the noise from our everyday minds. There are things like darkness retreats. So imagine sitting in absolute darkness for days, no phone, no conversation, no light, just you and your thoughts, basically, for up to like 5, 6, 10 days. And people come out of it with like life-altering experiences and realizations. And the interesting part is not because something was added, but because everything else was removed. For me, this sounds like a total nightmare. But I know people who have done this, and it must be, if you are ready to do this, it must be an amazing experience. Or there are things like wilderness solos, a rite of passage practiced by many indigenous cultures, alone in nature for multiple days, without stretching, fasting, only drinking water. So you don't have the distraction of looking for food or eating. And then your survival brain really calms down and something deeper awakens and you begin to see what really matters. And these experiences, they challenge our identity. And in doing so, they show us who we really are beyond the roles we are playing and what we are really doing in our lives. And I call it experience on the edge because they are really extreme and they're not for everybody. Just want to show you that there is a space, but people are doing these kinds of experiences. And yes, that's the trap I mentioned a bit earlier. Because once you get it right, you got it wrong. If you create a new paradigm, it's just a paradigm. And in September 2024, so not that long ago, everything looked perfect on paper for me. Now I co-created the company of my dreams. I was financially independent. I was in a long-term relationship. I lived in a beautiful home. So it was a life that my younger self would have admired. And one evening, I joined a breathwork session. That's something I had done many times before. But this time, something different happened. And deep inside, something cracked open. And I began to scream. That was new. Not emotionally, but from like a very primal place, deep down. It felt like a voice that I had suppressed for a long time. And in that moment, I saw what I hadn't dared to look at for the past years. And despite all the success, I wasn't truly happy. And I didn't feel safe in my home. I didn't feel alive in my work. And I realized I was still in the loop. I was still chasing a version of life that no longer fit. And that realization was not an idea, it was a knowing in my body. You know, the kind of truth that you cannot unsee once you get it. And so I made the hardest decision of my life. I left the relationship, I moved into a new home, and I decided to leave the company I helped build. And the reason I left Venture Idea wasn't because it wasn't a great company, it was, still is. But after 10 years, I found myself increasingly uninspired by advising large corporations on strategy or implementation large-scale innovation systems. I wanted to work on something that truly addresses the root cause or the root causes of our time. Something that helps people on a really deeper level. And not just us as a company, you know, because the culture is still amazing. The people, I love them, you know, they're really close friends. But I wanted to do it also for my clients. And while I felt called to take this path, my partners didn't want to go there with me. So after an initial hard time, I now feel better than ever, you know, more alive, happier. I feel so aligned now because something deep within me knew for a long time that I needed a shift. But I just didn't see it again, you know, even in that situation. And because at that time I just couldn't look. And because now that I found this clarity, there's no way I can ever unsee it again. And today I'm working with clients to address their most pressing personal, business related, and even planetary challenges by doing that exact same thing, you know, by helping them take off their glasses and live a life rooted in richness, in wholeness, in connection, in clarity, in vitality, in a deep inner alignment. So something that we could call true success. Um, Maybe let me put it like this. Clarity is always there. But sometimes we have to take everything apart before we can see it again. And once we get there, you can be pretty sure there are still many layers to uncover. So what if I'm wrong? That's the powerful question. So what if I'm wrong about what success looks like? What if I'm wrong about who I am? What I'm capable of? What if I'm not stuck, but I'm just looking through old glasses? What assumptions are we still living by? What invisible programs are shaping our goals? What glasses could we take off, if only for a brief moment? What if I'm wrong and that's the best news you've heard all day? Because that's the point where real success starts, because you finally see what's true for you. I found this quote and I found it quite fitting for the presentation today. And it says, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And that pretty much sums it up for me. And as a final gift to you, if you want, you can do a screenshot or whatever, take a photo. It's a prompt for an AI. You could also use it just to journal, but I found it quite helpful to use AI to do some work for me. And if you're ready to do that, you have to feel ready, then there's a prompt that could help you start your journey. And it goes like this. I want to take off the glasses I'm currently wearing, the beliefs I've accepted, the roads I'm stuck in, and the illusions I may be living under. Please guide me through this process by asking me 10 deep reflective questions, one at a time, to help me uncover the stories I'm telling myself. After I answer the 10th question, please step into the role of my wiser, higher self. reflect back to me my top limiting patterns and my top empowering patterns. Then offer daily affirmations to support my growth, actionable steps I can take to live in more alignment, a message of encouragement to honor how far I've already come. So this could be one step to start your journey if you'd like, just an offer. And yeah, if you want to discuss your results or just talk about what I just said, let's jump into the questions or drop me a line afterwards. I'm happy to get into the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Florian. I think we are having a couple of questions. So, your way of seeing how to align business approach, your consulting approach with your inner self, also affected, of course, your collaborator or co-founder, your partners. Can you also elaborate a little bit on the dynamics between yourself and the co-founders and what changed? And is there a friction between the outer world, your customers and yourself, that you have to defend your way of working and
Mhm.
aligning your work with yourself? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Mhm.
And
May-
Barbara has a question afterwards.
Maybe I start with the second half.
Yep.
In the beginning, we didn't tell anybody about our culture.
Ah,
You
okay.
know, we were really secretive about it because we thought like when our customers know, and we started with like really big customers right away, they would not pay us. Like if they know I'm working 3 days and then I go surfing for 2 days, they would not pay the price that we are, you know, because still we thought, okay, it's about the time we put in the project, not in the outcome. And once we like step by step, you know, once you have like longer projects, you get to know your customers better, you even maybe become friends. It happened quite a lot. You share more openly what you're doing.
Mhm.
And the feedback was so positive all the time.
Can you
You know,
elaborate a
as I
little
said,
bit what it has been the feedback?
yeah, I mean, you usually don't work with companies, you always work with people.
Yeah.
And when you tell them about this kind of culture, the question that usually arises is, can I work with you guys? Because everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people want that. You know, who doesn't want to have like a more aligned job with whatever they need, or even like if it's just time flexibility, you know, like the basic things. For us, it was way more. So we're like, okay, this is amazing. And so and this is also a really big part of our success that the company was us as people. So for example, when we did marketing or sales, it was rarely about the company because people want to work with us as people. So they want to work with Lucas or Lisander or with me
Mm.
and not with the company. And we stood for what we're doing and they liked us or they didn't like us. And if they liked us, they were also really open about not even open. It was always like a positive thing. Like the first time I was like really open about it was a presentation for a large travel company. And I did that from a surf camp in Portugal. And Lucas was on the presentation as well, the other partner. And he was in France on like parental leave. So he did the presentation like remotely. And it really like it was fine for them because they're a traveling company. So it was even easier. But afterwards we were like, you're not doing that all the time. You know, it doesn't really matter. And you know, it's about the results. And also, you know, this was the culture part, but when we're talking about our business, we were trying to always over deliver on our promise. So we had like super happy customers, and then they don't question how you do it. You know, then it really becomes about the results. And then if you have the good results and doing it like this, and it's not, you know, if you imagine we show up completely different to our customers because we really live what we're talking about and we are more happy maybe than other, you know, partners of other companies, maybe. So that's something we embody. So it was kind of this positive loop. And then we started, I think it was 6 years ago, to write a book about it called Good Job. And we were looking at, the paradigms of the working world and why it's so weird, why a lot of companies are taking decisions out of reflex and not out of reflection. And so we're looking at all these absurdities of the work life, and we're looking at it from our lens and put in our perspective. And the last chapter was actually about our culture. So we were really, really open with it. And the more we open up, the better it was.
Mhm.
And the first part, can you remind me again of the first part of the question? It was
Yeah,
about
the colleagues, the alignment
the
between the
dynamic.
colleagues.
Yeah. So let me take you back to a really important situation. It was like 7, 8 years ago, maybe. It was just the partners. We were in the Sahara Desert, in like this really nice camp, sitting down on these colored cushions, having like way too sweet tea. And we're talking about our culture. And somebody said, I don't know who was, said, it's it's not like it's not like we're having a company together. It's more like a marriage.
It is. Yeah.
And we said that, and we did it, and it was such a magical place to do that. Way more magical than Düsseldorf. To say that we promise each other to help each other to have the best life possible, whatever that means. And the company is only a means to an end, and it's one vehicle. It's a really powerful one. And that's why it's so important for us, because there's so many levers, because it's financial freedom, it's, personal success, it's whatever, creativity. So it's a really, really powerful vehicle, but it's just one. And it was always an option to leave the company. And it's always an option to leave the company for a while, or to start a new business and have the other partners be part of that. So everything was open under the paradigm that we help each other have a good life. And I'm actually the second partner who left the company. I was one that was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where Alexander left the company because he really wanted to go into working to protect the environment, like full time. And that's what he did. He became an activist, and now it's like really a big deal in protecting the wetlands. And that was something that just wasn't possible in the container we built as venture idea. So we're still supporting each other, but not in the container venture idea. And what I did, I tried to shift the container. I tried to make it work for the company. So what I wanted to do more like this, working on the people, on the root causes, rather than on the companies and the big structures. And it turned out that even though I think it would have been possible, the others just didn't want to do it, and then there is resistance. And that was also what kind of made me unhappy, made me feel like, but that's not, that can't be all, I mean, I've done amazing projects for the past 2 years. I was working in international development, for example, implementing the whole global innovation management system for KfW, so Development Bank, or for GIZ, which is the second biggest agency for international development. So like really interesting stuff that has a lot of impact. But still, I wanted to do something else after 10 years. But for that, the shift of the container would have been too grand for the other partners to still align with it. So it was clear I have to find a new container.
Mhm.
And still, we still support each other. So the promise is still true.
Awesome. Barbara, you have a question.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. This was a very inspiring talk. Yeah, I had the question that you can put the prompt, but ChatGPT already solved it for me, so I put the prompt into the chat. So if everybody who wants can copy it. And for me also this question about how your colleagues and co-founders react, or you manage that when suddenly someone decides to have other priorities or change or have personal development directions that were not expected. And you already said a little bit about that, but I think I imagine that is very challenging because I mean, you all trust each other and build on each other to like run this company. And if suddenly someone comes and wants to go different ways, this is like, this needs effort, this needs motivation, this needs energy, this needs,
Yeah, it sounds like it was really abrupt, and the decision kind of was. But one thing that was really important for us from the beginning was psychological safety. So we were always able to say whatever wanted to say. So you're like honest, like really honest to each other in a really brutal way sometimes. But that way there was no secret. So they knew from the beginning that I was frustrated with some parts of the company. Like um I told you, like for the past 2 years, I was working in international development. That was due to the fact that I didn't see much sense in just making rich people richer, because that's what most of venture ideas doing. And that's my way of seeing it. The other partners would put it differently, but my way is that, okay, yeah, if you go to Siemens or Telecom or whatever and make them more innovative, so they make 100 million more profit, yeah, that's what it is. You make rich people richer. And that really didn't motivate me from the beginning. So there was always a lot of like tension resistance, but we found ways. So like, okay, so if that's not good for you, what is it you want to do? Maybe work more like for nonprofits and stuff like that. So that was the first shift. So it was a journey, but this still wasn't enough for me because I was still working on systems and not on root causes. So it was a journey, and there was always like tension, and we were really good at working through problems, like in a good relationship. Because if there are no problems, then you're probably lying, or you're just lying to yourself or the others because there's stuff happening. But we're really good at resolving these and talking openly. We even had like coaches. We had a coach last year accompanying us with really interesting modalities like Kundalini yoga and transcendental reflection. So we were working a lot. So in the end, yes, it was hard, but it was kind of mutual. So it was not I decided to leave the company, but it was like, okay, this is not working anymore. That it doesn't make sense to work together. And so for me, it was hard because I had to leave this world that I created with so much work, as an entrepreneur for 10 years. And for them it was hard. I mean, we have 5 people. If one person's leaving, it's like 20% of the company is just gone. Um, so yeah, it's a big shift, but it's one that's I've been saying earlier, that there's so much change happening just for everything to remain the same. And
but
people
for,
change. Sorry?
like in your case of like looking at a company, of course, yeah, it's like 20% going, but still I mean, they can survive without you and you'll build up something new and you're all
Exactly.
fine and you managed it right. Yeah. But you already said you can also take this example to like couples in a marriage. Yeah. There are only two. Perhaps they have kids.
Mhm.
And when you decide to change and like as you said now, we didn't find a solution to come together, then does this mean to separate?
Not necessarily. There are two ways to change. Um, One way is to change internally, the internal world, and the other way is to change the external world. And the first one you want to look at is always the internal world, especially when you talk about relationships. Because is it really, about the situation you're facing with your partner, or is it your perception of the situation? And how can I change myself in order to make the relationship work? So that would always be the first thing. And I've been working on this for over a decade, like meditation, everything. So that's number one. And if that is not working, then a change in the external world is just necessary. So if you go to couples therapy, um, a separation is always an option. Couples therapy is not to fix the relationship. It's to look at the problem and see how if the problem can be solved, or in what way the people who are joining the therapy are better off afterwards. And I think that's the same thing. Um, but it's also really really hard to make the choice, because it's always easier to make um, not easier, but it looks easier to make the change on the outside, to move to a different country. But it doesn't, the important thing is that it's not an escape, that you're not escaping the problem by changing, but you're changing because you need more alignment with your actual self, so that you can live with your values, that you can live according to your true self and your truth.
Tyron posted a wonderful example that is somehow aligned with the University of Sydney. Before Sandra is raising her question, Tyron, would you like to make a comment to Ben Delta?
Yeah, I think, Florian, thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting. It's kind of there's a bit of a cultural underpinning here, because if you look in Australia, we sort of tend to live. We don't live to work. We work to live, and so our relationship with work is quite different. So to me, the sort of stuff you're saying is the stuff I sort of kind of grew up with. Um, so an example is a colleague of mine who started Ben Delta, and Ben Delta has been going for like 15, 16 years, and it sort of espouses the very principles you're talking about, and they sort of take it very seriously, and they have increasingly had more and more clients and bigger and bigger clients around that. Um, Again, there is a kind of a fairly good turnover rate. So it's quite normal for people to leave Ben Delta, but they stay connected, almost like a
Mhm.
network, a bridge. Um, but there is a cultural aspect here, I think, that's important, that some cultures are much more open and much more oriented to this way of working and being. Um, you know, uh, like I've noticed in the UK, it's not like that at all, right?
Mhm.
It's and so I think so. Ben Downs is a very good example of that, where it really looks
Mhm.
around sort of um, self-enrichment. It sort of has some philosophical underpinnings around the philosophy of meaning and the philosophy of how we make sense of the world, and a lot of the CEOs sort of are also well-read philosophers, for example. So Heidegger's principle of Dasein, where you go off into the forest to disappear, and that brings about transformation, and these sorts of things. So there's a strong philosophical aspect. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So yeah.
Beautiful.
So it's
Thanks, you,
yeah.
Tyron. Sandra, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, this was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Florian. I have a question because you described how you and your team went through a transformation by engulfing in the spiritual practices and finding the sense or what success is for you. And did you do the same thing for the managers of those companies you worked for so that they kind of could have developed their innovations themselves? Or did you just do the classical thing for them, just being clear in yourself, but then working like they used to work? So, and then if you did these management lead through similar processes like you went along, I would be interested in how much of this spiritual language did you
Um,
use? Like,
okay.
can you
Mhm.
talk about, I don't know, higher self, or did you, were you like cautious in the beginning and more open?
Mhm.
Like, how did you proceed? That would be very interesting.
Mhm. So the focus was definitely on ourselves. And when we were going into the companies, we were like really, especially in the beginning, talking the language of the boardroom. So we were the ones in the suits, even more dressed up than the other the other big five, because we are so big, yeah, the big five. And step by step, as we changed, the way we went about things changed. But we never offered explicitly to do something like this with the clients. But we kind of did anyways. So it was more like like a more sneaky way here and there to put stuff in, especially when you imagine I worked, the two projects I worked on, I did that by myself. So I was the only one from our team, with some support of our back office, working in the project for 1 year. So you get really close relationships. And there I sneaked in a lot, but it really depends on the person you work with. Most of the people from our clients, it's really hard to talk really openly about these topics. But the more you open up, the more you're surprised to get. Even, I don't want to get too much into detail, but even like head of strategy for large corporations that are super traditional from South Germany, where you would think the only thing they do is work and, I don't know, maybe drink beer and vote for Markus Söder. When you talk to them, you're like, no, there's so much depth and so much reflection, and they are on their spiritual path, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be like super, super intense, but maybe they do meditation, or and the more we opened up, the more you see how much is hidden underneath. And one really good example for that is, I mean, you talk spiritual practices, even the word spiritual practices is a hard one, because while spirituality is often mixed up with religion, and then people are shut down. But one, I think, good example is psychedelics, which would have been a taboo like a couple of years ago to talk about mind-altering substances. But it's become really normal. Now, if you go to conferences, even in Davos, there was last year at the World Economic Forum, there was a whole house for psychedelics. So they were, just talking about psychedelics there because it's become our industry. And so there are more and more topics like this um, coming into the attention of the mainstream, and by this, to the attention of the boardroom. And especially if you go to younger companies, if you go to a startup world, it's a very different story than you go to like a industrial company. But yeah, my takeaway was I just talk as openly as possible, and still try to match the language of the other person. And the more open up, the more they open up. And if they don't, they don't. And it's completely fine. This is more the way. And this is, my last sentence. This is the reason why I left, because this is what I want to do more now. Or not want to, I'm doing it right now. So I know for example, I have a client who is creative director of one of the largest PR companies in the world. And he's exactly in this situation. He has accomplished everything, perfect job, 4 kids, big house, and he feels empty. And he's like, why is that? What can I do? How can I get more into myself, my creative power, my, energy? How do I get there? And that's the question that really interests me. And now I'm able to really dig deep and talk openly, because that's, they're asking for it. That's the job now. So maybe that answers your question.
Yes,
Not at all
thank
in the
you.
beginning, then we sneaked it in, and now I'm doing it like full time.
Awesome. I look a little bit on the time, and I would slowly close the session. It's hopefully not the last time we see each other and hear each other, Florian.
I really hope
Just
so.
for those who like books, Clayton Christensen's About What Matters is going in a similar direction, that he follows the path of the alumni of Harvard and recognize they are earning more and more money, they are stepping up the ladder, have a corner office, how many acres, house, divorced, and estranged to their kids, and at the end, what really matters. And then this is something different. And I think one of the big question is how to get out of the hamster wheel um, to be bold enough and brave enough to stand up and stay by yourself and figure out what not is not expected from the outside world, but what you need from the inside world. Yeah, how will you measure your life, Clayton Christensen? Thank you so much. Good. Thank you so much for all of you.
I have to leave.
College tape. I stop
Thank you.
here and have a good evening and see you soon. Thank you, Florian.